Atom Assault is an evolution of Nuke Them All. It takes that no-nonsense RTS energy and puts it on a bigger stage with more freedom for the mess to happen. The game's own page defines Atom Assault as an indie RTS in full 3D, where everything explodes, and you can even pilot nukes in first person. In other words, it's the same spirit of destruction, just with a much looser camera and ambition. The coolest point for me is that evolution here doesn't sound like a lazy sequel, but rather like that moment when the studio admits, okay, we've already tested the idea, now let's rebuild it the way we always wanted. This appears clearly when the Nuke Them All community describes Atom Assault as the next evolution and a new game made from scratch in full 3D. It's not just an update, it's a step up. And that's where nuclear chaos in 3D becomes more than a catchphrase. In 3D, the chaos becomes a presence. When the game says everything explodes and even lets you literally control the nuke, it's not just spectacle. It's a design choice that fits the franchise's identity. Red versus blue warfare, destruction as a language, and that RTS vibe that doesn't want to take itself too seriously. This kind of conscious exaggeration is exactly what makes Nuke Them All's heritage feel alive rather than just referenced. Atom Assault is a direct message to those who enjoy old school RTS, but wanted to see the idea go beyond the flat plane and become a real three-dimensional toy. The promise is simple and honest. It's still strategy, but with strategy and stupidity hand in hand, explosions everywhere, and the nuke as the star, only now in a complete 3D that lets the madness happen in a more cinematic and unpredictable way. If Nuke Them All was the prototype of insanity, Atom Assault wants to be the version where the studio takes off the training wheels and hits the gas. When I found out that Atom Assault was developed by a single person, Papa Mike, I automatically changed the way I look at the game. It's not just another chaotic RTS, it's practically a signature. The Steam page already sells this unapologetic indie vibe, strategy and stupidity hand in hand, everything explodes, and you can even literally pilot a nuke. And considering this came from the head and hands of just one person, the chaos becomes even more impressive. To me, the most interesting part of this trivia is imagining how much creative decision-making remains pure in a solo project. There's no committee trimming the edges, no meeting killing good ideas, no fear of sounding silly. Atom Assault is exactly the kind of game that feels like it was made by someone who said, I want this my way. Red versus blue war, humor, exaggeration, destruction, and mechanics that embrace the absurd as part of the charm. There's also a human side that I really like. When people comment, share your ideas with Papa Mike, the indie dev making all this chaos happen, you can feel that there is an accessible creator there, close to the community. This feeling of there's a person on the other side changes the experience. You're not just consuming a product, you're following a vision, and that fits perfectly with a game that has a strong personality and doesn't try to please everyone. Ultimately, this trivia explains why the game looks like a crazy idea that worked, because that's exactly how solo projects tend to shine. If Atom Assault manages to deliver a 3D RTS full of explosions, with modes like piloting missiles and a fun first energy, I respect it immensely, not just for the result, but for the courage to tackle a scope like this alone. The game's graphics are a mix of totally accurate battle simulator and Minecraft. The low poly idea isn't there to save on detail, but to make everything more readable and funnier when things start to get out of control. And Atom Assault clearly wants you to see the chaos happening, not have you admiring wall textures. When you add Minecraft to this comparison, I think of blocky shapes, flat colors, and a world that seems simple. Until you drop an explosion in the middle and it becomes a perfect stage for destruction. Meanwhile, the totally accurate part is that intentionally wonky physics energy where things wobble, fly, and collide, and you laugh. because it feels like the game is always one step away from becoming a crazy scientific experiment, and that's exactly where the charm lies. The coolest part is that this type of visual matches the game's proposal perfectly. Strategy, but without the pose. War, but with humor. Everything explodes, but in a way you can keep up with. Personally, I prefer this path 1,000 times over a heavy realism that makes everything brown, serious, and too cinematic. Because here, exaggeration is the identity, and the visual becomes part of the joke and the tactical reading at the same time. And there's a detail I find brilliant. Low poly plus crazy physics gives the game the freedom to be bold without apologizing. You more easily accept a missile that goes spinning out of control, a unit that ends up in space, or a chain of explosions that looks like a domino effect of chaos, because the style already warned you, relax, this is for you to have fun. This trivia for me is practically a summary of Atom Assault's DNA. Simple to look at, absurd in behavior, and unforgettable when everything starts going wrong in the right way. This trivia about the zombies of the night that can turn even robot soldiers into the undead is, for me, the kind of idea that says, here, the war isn't just between two factions, it's against the game itself trying to mess up your plan. I really like it when an RTS introduces a third element that doesn't care about pretty strategy, because it totally changes the mood. You start out thinking you're controlling the chaos, and suddenly, the chaos grows teeth. The detail of infecting robots is what makes it even crazier. Usually, in zombie lore, machines are immune, right? So when the game breaks this logic, it's basically telling you that the rules of this world are intentionally bent, and that opens up space for absurd situations, like your front line becoming a double problem. You lose a unit and still feed the enemy with a worse version of it. And of the night is the icing on the cake, because it creates that psychological clock in your head. I can see myself playing and thinking, okay, by day I advance. By night I become the apocalypse janitor, reinforcing the base, closing gaps, repositioning troops, and trying not to let anyone get isolated. This unpredictable layer is great for generating emergent stories. Those matches you remember not because you won, but because you survived by a hair. In the end, this mechanic gives me a very specific feeling. The game doesn't just want you to be good at attacking and defending, it wants you to deal with disaster. And honestly, I love when a game has the courage to create these unfair twists in a good way, because it turns every decision into a gamble. Is it worth risking a push now? Or will you pay dearly when night falls and the infection starts making your army work against you? Atom Assault's minimum requirements give off that good indie game feeling of wanting to run on as many PCs as possible without requiring a spaceship, and that fits perfectly with its premise of chaos, explosions, and straightforward fun. On Steam, the minimum calls for Windows 10 and 11, a 64-bit processor equivalent to an Intel Core 2 or higher, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and only 4 gigabytes of disk space. I like this combination because it's curious. The minimum CPU is very modest. The Core 2 is an old warrior, so the game doesn't seem obsessed with heavy processing. At the same time, 16 gigabytes of RAM as a minimum catches the eye and suggests that even with low poly visuals, the game can fill the screen with simulations, units, and explosions, making the memory the lungs of the mess. Another detail that excites me is the low disk space, 4 gigabytes for the base game, which nowadays is almost a miracle. This has a very practical side for those playing on smaller SSDs or who are constantly rotating installed games. You test it, play around, and decide if it joins your routine without that ritual of uninstalling 3 things first. And if you're the type who likes to try before you buy, the demo seems even lighter on storage. 2 gigabytes with the same general OS and CPU package, and also 16 gigabytes of RAM as a minimum. The game's demo is already available, and for me, that completely changes the conversation. Instead of just promising a chaotic RTS, Atom Assault puts the controls in your hand right now the moment curiosity hits. And the coolest part is that it's not a distant teaser. It's a direct invitation for you to feel the rhythm of the game and decide based on experience, not hype. When I see a demo released like this, I immediately think of two things: confidence and courage. Confidence, because the studio basically says, here it is, play it and tell me what you think. Courage, because RTS is a genre where controls, map reading, and the feeling of command need to click fast, otherwise you'll uninstall without mercy. If the demo hooks you in the first few minutes, it's a great sign that the feeling of the game is on the right track. And there's a detail I really like. A Steam demo is the kind of thing that gives the player permission to test it their own way. You can jump in just to see if the camera movement is comfortable, if the commands make sense, if the interface isn't offensive, and most importantly, if the game's chaos is fun or just noise. This is perfect for anyone who has been fooled by a pretty trailer only to suffer with the gameplay later. Personally, I like this demo as live moment because it becomes a more honest conversation between dev and community. You test, you give feedback, and the game starts to build itself based on that reaction. And if you like the demo, you can put the game on your wish list and just wait for the full release. The fully destructible world is what transforms Atom Assault from an ordinary RTS into an arena of visual and tactical chaos, the kind you watch and think, man, this isn't just a base building game, it's an explosion playground. Everything you see on the map, roads, hills, towers, buildings, rivers, can be undone, turned to dust, and change the flow of battle. It's a game that understands that at its core, RTS is about power and consequence, and power here is literally destroying the world. When everything can explode, the map stops being a background and becomes part of the strategy. You're not just positioning troops and cannons, you're also calculating what's best to blow up to create ditches, block passages, or even make the enemy fall into natural traps. High ground can become a crater, an intact bridge can disappear in seconds, and that structure that looked like a weak point can become a curtain of rubble that armored your flank. This requires a different perspective, not just where to attack, but how to mess up the ground beneath their feet. The cool thing about this total destruction is that it's not just pretty pyrotechnics, though it is very bombastic. It has real weight in the match. An attack that previously seemed controlled can turn into sudden chaos if you or the enemy detonate something in the wrong place, and that changes the mood of the combat. The fact that structures, terrain, and entire maps are open to destruction gives a rare sense of freedom. You're not just playing against the enemy, you're shaping the battlefield itself like it's clay. And when the whole map starts to peel away, turning into a puzzle of craters and debris, the game gains a look and rhythm that few RTS games achieve. It's strategy mixed with pure anarchy. The first-person Nuke mode is exactly the kind of thing that transforms Atom Assault from a traditional RTS into a game that blends war tension with direct action adrenaline. Instead of just pressing a button and watching a bomb icon fall from the sky, you take the controls and step into the shoes of the missile itself, guiding it in real time, almost like a crazy FPS mixed with an RTS. It's a brutal shift in perspective. 1 second you're there on the map, looking at everything from above, orchestrating troops, and the next you're inside the missile, flying low, dodging defense towers, roaring between mountains, and trying to keep that projectile in a straight line toward the enemy base. It's not just a select, target, and forget deal, it's a tense minigame where every turn, every descent can be what decides if the base explodes or just gets scratched. What gets me most about this is that it transforms the strategic core into a moment of personal pleasure. You spent the whole match building the base, defending, attacking, and at the time of the final assault, the game says, go ahead, do it yourself, take the bomb to their heart. This gives a different emotional weight to the nuclear strike. It's not just a ace up your sleeve, it's something you feel, almost as if you were piloting chaos incarnate. And there's a sense of suspense that few RTS games achieve. The radar blinking, defense alerts rising, you trying to keep the missile straight while the enemy tries to shoot it down, and that split second between impact and explosion. When the cone of light hits the ground and the base vanishes in a fireball, there's an air of, I did this. I guided it personally. It's exactly the kind of thing that turns an ordinary match into an unforgettable moment. The game features dynamic weather. Day turns to night, with rain, thunder, and shadows that affect combat. This is one of those things that elevates Atom Assault from a chaotic RTS to a war game with real atmosphere. It's not just a pretty background changing colors, it's a cycle that messes with vision, tension, and the way you view the map and plan every move. When day turns to night, the game changes its face. Long shadows crawl across the terrain, towers and structures hide away, and suddenly you can't see where the enemy is as clearly. This forces you to think differently. You can't just send the army on autopilot and assume everything is under control. Night demands more calculated defenses, patrols, more watchtowers, and makes you feel like the map has become a dangerous place where any movement could be a hidden attack. The rain, thunder, and low lighting also create a totally different rhythm. The sound of combat mixes with the weather, and that projectile impact or explosion noise gains more weight. Behind every flash of lightning, there is a scene that changes fast, and this can mask movements, camouflage a sneaky attack, or reveal a positioning error on your part. It's the kind of weather that transforms an ordinary match into a tense battle, where time and the environment are practically another enemy. For me, this is what differentiates an RTS about making soldiers walk from a game that really puts you in the middle of a war. The fact that day, night, rain, and shadows are not just aesthetic but affect vision, tactics, and risk makes the game breathe. You stop just playing card after card and start playing along with the weather, with the world, and that is exactly the kind of detail that makes us feel in the middle of that strategic chaos. The fact that the game has classic RTS controls is exactly what makes Atom Assault feel like a child of Command & Conquer, the kind of RTS that someone who grew up with Red Alert or Tiberian Dawn feels in their blood as soon as they start playing. Unit groups, waypoints, rally points, and C&C style resource gathering are not just mechanics, it's a return to a way of thinking about RTS that values rhythm, precision, and a sense of direct command without overly modern interface fluff. When you form a group, set a waypoint, and send the attack combo forward in a line, every key and every click has weight, because you know that a poorly made order could cost you the match. The rally point, for example, is one of those small things that makes a difference. Instead of an attack tower just sitting there, the new soldier leaves the base already in a combat position, and that gives a flow of continuous warfare that already geared up air that the best classic RTS games have. C&C style resource gathering is also a relief. You don't need to babysit every harvester because the system already understands that the worker will get the raw material, take it to the base, and return on their own. This keeps the focus where it should be, on the offensive, the defense, and the tactical maneuver. And when the game adopts this direct model without excessive forced micromanagement, combat flows faster and the player feels in control of the field, not in a shift management sim. For those who want an RTS of action, chaos, and strategy, these classic controls are like an old uniform that still fits perfectly. They don't innovate radically, but they hit where it counts, letting the player feel like a real commander with an army in hand, precise orders, and the fast pace that everyone remembers fondly from the great RTS games of the 90 seconds and 2000s.